Do you believe in ghosts? I graduated from St. Olaf College in 1995, which is the same school from which my father graduated in 1963, and my grandfather graduated in 1931. Dad and I were chemistry majors, and Grandpa was a 9-time varsity letter winner. 4 in basketball, 4 in football, and 1 in baseball. My first and longest student athletic training assignment was with the men's basketball team. I logged over 1,600 hours in the student athletic training room, and almost daily I passed by Grandpa's Hall of Fame plaque. And sometimes I would stop for a visit and a chat. And I often wondered, did he know that I was there? And was he happy? And was he proud? Grandpa died when I was in 7th grade. So he never knew that I was even interested in St. Olaf, or that I had applied and been accepted and was attending. Grandpa returned to St. Olaf from 1935 to 1937, where he was the St. Olaf football coach, and he was the headmaster of Iterborough Residence Hall, which at the time was an all-men's dorm. Iterborough was built in 1900 from bricks and straw insulation, and it was intended to be a temporary residence hall. When I arrived, if you stood with your back to the wall and looked up to the roof, you could see the ripples and the waves in the brick and a little bit of straw poking through the insulation and the mortar. Because of rumors of instability and grand piano-sized holes in the floor, the college had shut down the building for living, but they had kept the attic for storage and the basement and the bottom 2 floors for student activity space and offices. On the second to last day of my sophomore year, a group of friends and I had agreed to help my roommate Martha, originally from Texas, haul all of her stuff from our basement room in Melby up to the attic in Iterborough for storage. When I took my second trip up with the awkwardly heavy box, and as I started to come down, I stopped on the 3rd floor. The padlock was hanging from the door, limp and open. The building was quiet, deadly quiet, and not even a breath of air was moving from the leaky old windows. I didn't even hear footfalls above me or below me, and I waited for Martha to come down or someone to come up, and when finally no one came, I stepped forward and went through the door. What surprised me, or what I found surprised me, but it didn't really, the hallway was empty, and I could see all the way to the end of the building. The floors were stripped naked down to the pale wood, and the rooms were empty and devoid of furniture. The doorways into the room and the closets had been robbed of their doors, and you could see the closet rods hanging with nothing there. I could also see the old furnace registers, rusty on the floors, and even the old hookups that they'd used for the water fountains back when the dorm was still active in the 70s. As I stood in that empty space filled with nothing more than trapped sunlight, suspended dust, and frozen time, I became aware of Grandpa. Nothing was said, and it wasn't something I saw. I just felt him standing behind my right shoulder, waiting. When I was ready, we started to walk down the hall to the first dorm room on the left-hand side. And I looked in, and I saw a young man dressed in brown tweed pants and a light linen shirt of the 1930s style, sitting at his desk, studying. The desk was covered with papers, his bed was neatly made, and his clothes were fairly neatly hung in the closet. We stood there and watched for a few minutes, and then we moved on to the next room, which was empty, but empty only because the young man that should have been there was in the hallway in the room across the way, talking to the man there. We waited and listened to their conversation for a few minutes before moving on to the next room, where 3 young men were sitting, all dressed in dark-colored knickers, light-colored button-down shirts, and the newsboy hats of the time. One was sitting at a desk, the other was sprawled across the floor, and the third had tossed himself across the bed. They were talking about something that had happened on campus that day, laughing, and we waited and listened and watched. As we prepared to walk down the hall to the 4th room on the left-hand side, a beautifully hand-stitched leather ball rolled from the right side of the hall in front of us, diagonally across the hall to the next room. Grandpa and I walked the full length of the building, down the left side and back the right, stopping at each room, looking inside, seeing the furniture and the clothes, and the boys that he watched over during his time in Interval Hall. When we reached the end, at the door, I just simply walked through. Much as I'd never said hello, I didn't say goodbye. But I knew that Grandpa knew I was there, and he was very happy, and he was very proud. I walked down the staircase and found my friends outside, and they were all greatly relieved and a little bit frustrated. "Where have you been for the last hour?" said Dave, who ironically was the grandson of one of my grandfather's closest friends. I said, "Well, I was up on the 3rd floor. Is all the hauling done?" He said, "You were not on the 3rd floor. That door was padlocked. But yes, the hauling is done. You have missed all the work." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I want to tell you a little story about my dance in the dust with my ghost." Thank you, Mr. Joseph.